Getting photos that are ready to print is sometimes a little bit of a mystery. In today's video, what we're going to do is take a look at how you can, one, process a raw file, and then two, prepare it for print. So with all that out of the way, let's jump into today's video. Here we are inside of On1 Photo Raw 2026, and I am going to work with this particular image. Now, of course, if you are an FWP Academy member, you have access to these files as well as the session files, so you can see exactly what I did, and hopefully all of that will make sense. Now, if you want to join the FWP Academy, you can do so by using a link in the description box below. The first thing that I want to do with this particular image is just go ahead and activate Brilliance AI. So I'll come over to the right and just click on Brilliance AI. Holding down the backslash key, this is before and after. It hasn't really done a whole lot, at least to my personal taste. And so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and drag the amount slider over to the right. And I'm looking for a more contrasted photo. Something like this actually works well. Now, I think the challenge for me with this particular image is, yes, I have the contrast, but I feel like the color kind of got messed up. And so what I'm going to do is jump down to tone and color. And you'll notice that I have a lot of my tone settings already adjusted because that's just what Brilliance AI does for us. But what I really need to do is come down to the color section, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull all the color out. And honestly, I think Brilliance AI did a great job with getting the contrast. So I'm actually happy with where we are right now for the contrast. And so I'm just going to double click saturation to reset that and double click vibrance to reset that. And, this is just a quick tip that if you're new to On1, if you double click on either of the text where a slider exists, then what it'll do is reset it to 0. So you don't have to worry about trying to drag this, slider back to 0 or whatever. You can also double click on the node, but sometimes that's a little finicky. I usually always double click on the text, and that works out just fine. I have my color, or at least my saturation and my vibrance established. So I think I need to start with my white point or my white balance, I should say. And so because I'm using the auto feature inside of Brilliance AI, what I need to do is come to where it says white balance and hit this drop down arrow and select the as shot. Now, this is what the white balance was when it came out of my camera. And the reason why I want to do that is when I start to manipulate this temperature, I want to see what my camera actually captured versus what On1 kind of threw at me. And again, that's where I was thinking the color got messed up. It typically always starts with the white balance, and this is personal preference. Maybe yours doesn't have that issue. But with that being said, I'm going to come over to temperature. I'm going to grab the temperature slider here, and I feel like it's a little too warm or it has too much yellow tones in it. And so I'm just going to go ahead and pull this down to the left. And again, I'm looking at the photo. I am not looking at the slider or the numbers because I'm adjusting the photo, not the slider. I don't care what numbers are on any given adjustment. I really care about how that translates into the overall photo. And so that's what I'm doing here. And now that I have the white balance established, I can start working with my color. And so what I like to do is come down here to saturation and just pull that all the way down. And again, this gives you a black and white photo, but I want to go a little bit beyond just a black and white photo. And so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and pull up on the saturation until I feel the image has enough color for me to go and work with inside of the effects. Or if this is where I want to stop, and many people do stop here, then I know that I have a photo that has enough color information. Now, one of the things that you have to be aware of is your computer monitor is backlit, which means that there's light information coming through. So the colors that you're seeing, even with a calibrated monitor in some cases, you are probably going to need a little bit more color and a little bit more light when you want to print a photo. And so that's something that you got to think about when you're working here. Now, I don't think that I have an issue with light in this particular image, but again, I have a technique a little bit later that's going to show you how I kind of work with that. But when it comes to color, I think I need just a touch more color because, yeah, the grains are very saturated, but they need a little bit more saturation, I think. So I'm just going to push that just a touch more. And, again, this is always going to be subjective. However, just know that when you print, you're going to want a little bit more color in the image that you send to a printer because you want the printer to be able to find values to put onto the paper. If it's too low of a saturated value, then you may not get color in that area, or at least enough color in order for it to be perceived. So just keep that in mind, experiment, and eventually you'll learn what makes the most sense, especially if you're using the same print lab or if you're printing at home with the same printer. Now, the next step is vibrance, and this is probably one of those sliders that's really important when it comes to preparing a file for print, because if you have too little vibrance, then you're not going to get enough color, at least in my experience, you're not going to get enough color to the printer. And so what I like to do is I like to crank the vibrance all the way up until I get like crazy, like silly colors, and then just pull it down until I get to a point where it's like, okay, everything looks well saturated. And that's kind of the goal. All right. Sometimes you got to go back and forth between saturation and vibrance in order to get that look, but don't worry about it. Just find what works well for your workflow and the image that you're working on, because it's always going to be a little subjective. All right. The only thing that is objective is that you're going to want to make sure you have enough color to print onto the paper. And based off of how much color is in your image, that's going to vary. And, there's ways of measuring that, but we're not going to actually get into that in today's video because that's way more technical than I think necessary. So let's go ahead and take a look at the before. This image, a little dull. It is a raw photo and it has decent colors, but not enough, not good enough to print, I think. And then here's where we are so far. Now, this is the base edit. You could stop here, and I wouldn't recommend it, but you could absolutely print this file and you would be good to go. But before you do that, you want to hold down the J key or turn on your clipping indicators to make sure that you are able to see where your image is losing detail. And what you'll notice is here in the back end of the bird, and then also up here, I'm losing some information in my shadow or my darkest pixels. And so what I'm going to do is click on tone, and then I'm just going to go ahead and pull my black point up until that goes away. And then I'm going to go and check the feather. Looks like I need to go up a little bit more, right around there. And so now I know that I have an image that is safe to print. So if you don't want to fiddle around with anything else in a file, because, sometimes using the other segments of On1 can be a little intimidating, you could stop right here. You could print this image and your image should come out pretty good. So once I have the base edit done, it's time to start making a little bit more advanced edits. So we'll come over to local adjustments. And the first thing that I want to do is use a quick mask AI brush. Now you're probably wondering, like, Chris, well, why the heck would you use a quick mask AI brush? Why don't you just use the subject or the background? And I'll show you why. So if I click on background and then I press the letter O, you'll notice that the duck is not actually cut out. And the reason the duck isn't cut out is because the AI, it's really just not picking up that this is a full duck. It could be because the duck isn't in full focus. There could be a number of reasons. And I could spend time trying to clean up this mask manually or using some of the other tools. But what I found is it's just a lot easier. Let's go ahead and remove this. And we will reset this mask. So what I'll do is come over to mask layers, and I'm going to click the plus icon to the far right here. This is going to give me my masking options. And the one that I want to use here is Quick Mask AI. And because this is the first mask that I'm applying to this adjustment, I need to click on Add Default. And so what this does is it tells on one to go and analyze the image, which it did already. And then I'm just going to click on the duck or the goose here. And then I'm going to click on this one as well. And then I'll come up here and click the blue check mark. Now, at the moment, what On1 has just done is it's selected those two animals. Well, I want to work on the background, so I need the opposite of that. And so what I'm going to do is come back to masking, and then I'll click on mask layers this time, and you'll notice I now have an actual mask layer. But what I want to do is invert this entire mask. And so I need to come up here to target mask. All right. So I'll come to target mask and I'll hit the 3-line menu. And then I'm just going to come down to invert. And so now I've successfully selected the background and as well as the foreground. Now, with the new masking tools inside of On1, I can stack more masks on top of each other. And so I want to remove the adjustment for the background from the foreground here. To do that, I'll come over to masking. I'm going to come back to mask layers, hit the plus icon, and then I'm going to grab a gradient, and then I'm going to click on subtract. And so what this has done is right now it's just removing it from the top of the photo, but that's not where I want to remove it. So guess what? I'm going to rotate this. And the reason why it defaulted to removing the adjustment is what I mean by it. The reason it defaulted to removing it from the top of the frame instead of the bottom is because I inverted the target mask. All right. So this is just, opposite day. Everything's upside down. But don't worry. The cool thing about working with a gradient mask is that you can just rotate it in whatever direction you need to. So just have your masking overlay turned on and then watch what I can do here. So I can go ahead and rotate it like I've already done. And then I'll just go ahead and pull this down until I get to about here. And I can even rotate this to follow the natural grade of the road here or the path. And that looks like it's working just fine. And then, of course, I don't really want this to fade down here. I want the fade to start a little bit higher. So I think I'm actually just going to pull this up and then feather this further up into the frame. And so now I can actually make an adjustment because so far all I've done was create a mask. Press the letter O to turn off our mask overlay. We'll click on our adjustment to expand it. And what I want to do is just pull down on the exposure. And probably somewhere around here is pretty good. Now, you got to be careful. If you go too far, you can start to see halos. And if those halos around the outlines start to drive you crazy, there are some ways of dealing with that. One way that you can deal with it is come up to masking, and then we'll come back to our Quick Mask AI. That's important. You need to be on the Quick Mask AI. Click the 3-line menu, and then click Refine Mask. And what this does is it gives us some tools. And new inside of Foreground 2026, we have access to the Shift Edge feature. And so if I pull this to the left, you can see how that starts to get a little bit closer and it's reducing those halos. Is it going to completely remove those halos? No, not always. But you can also work with your feather. And you can pull the feather up, which is going to probably increase the halo effect even more. And then, you got to really play around with this. But for the most part, if you shift the edge, you typically can reduce that halo look. But I would also be careful with just trying to minimize or pull your exposure down so far that you're starting to get those halos, right? And so definitely want to pull this up just a bit here. And that's looking pretty good. So let's just go ahead and turn off the adjustment and turn it back on. And you'll notice I'm only impacting the background there. Now, I'll also reduce the contrast by pulling that down just a touch here. And all that's doing is just helping make the birds have more contrast in the photo, which is going to help with the overall look, in my personal opinion. So let's look at a before and after. And I think this is going to work out really well because when this photo prints, the background will be dark and then the birds will have more information to make them brighter. Now, I need to do something about this foreground. And the thing that I am probably going to do with it is just darken it down just a little bit. And so I'm going to come up to local, come over to more, click on gradient or hover over gradient, and then I'm going to add in a gradient mask. Now, I use a lot of gradient masks, so, just bear with me. But if I go ahead and pull down on the exposure, drag this down, and then rotate it a little bit, just so that way it follows the grade of this road. Now, right now, the exposure is probably pulled down way more than it needs to be because I think that there's some value of having the light. So let's just go ahead and pull this even further down. And then I'm going to pull down the opacity and just slowly pull this up. Now, when this prints, it will be more dramatic because photos print darker than we see them on the screen. And that's something to be aware of. All right. So I'm paying attention to that as I'm looking at the photo. And then I turn this off and turn it on. And I know that that's going to print a little bit darker than what it's actually showing here. And so now I think that the birds need a little bit of work. And we'll just call this FG adjust. And so now we're going to go back over to more and we're going to use Quick Mask AI because why make things more difficult than they need to be? I'm going to click to add, and then I'm just going to select both of these animals and I'm going to hit the plus icon or the check mark, I'm sorry, to actually commit that. Now, what I want to do is add in some structure. And then I'm also going to open up the shadows. Now, this isn't a move that I do regularly, but for this particular photo, I feel like the birds needed a little bit of shadow increase. And I want to be very, very mindful that I do have that negative exposure going around the outside of the birds, but I don't want to overdo any adjustments. And so I'm just trying to be mindful of that, but I am going to increase the midtones a bit here and probably even pull up on the highlights. Lots of increasing for this particular edit. And so if I turn it off and turn it back on, I think it's a bit too much. And so what I'll do is pull down the opacity and then just glide this in. Again, I'm looking at the photo and not the opacity slider. Somewhere around 56 seems to make the most sense for this particular image. And so I'll call this bird adjust. Now it's time to kind of do some detail work with the birds. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in just a little bit. And you can tell this photo, it wasn't all that focused. I'm guilty, but it's life. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and click on the brush icon here, hit the drop down, and we're going to go with eye animal details or animal eye brush. That's what we want. And I do have these already published in a post here on YouTube. So if you are interested, you can definitely go do that, or you can just pause the video and you can see the adjustments right here. I don't have anything further down, so you're not missing out on anything further into the color section for this brush, right? And so what I'll do is just minimize my brush size and paint right over the eye. Now, I do have a low flow on my brush. And so because I want to just paint this in one stroke, I'm going to come up to my brush settings, which are in the upper left, and I'm going to pull the flow all the way up to 100%. Now, if you're not familiar with flow, don't worry about it. But essentially, when you have a low flow, you're not going to get 100% of your adjustment when you paint with a brush. but I'm going to go ahead and click one time, and you can see what that does to the eye there. Just makes it kind of pop off of the frame. Now, I don't like what it did with this one, so I'm going to make a smaller brush than the actual eye and then click inside of it. And so it's just getting that really bright portion of the eye, and I like what it's doing there. So let's zoom out, and then let's turn off the eye bright and turn it back on. Now, for the goose here, I think that it probably is a little too much. And so what I'm going to do is just pull down on the opacity, and I'm not going to worry so much about what's happening over here. Now that I have all of my local adjustments applied, this is the point where I could go ahead and export the image and prepare it for print, because if I hold down the J key, you can see things are just fine. There's no clipping indications. But what I really want to do is work on the color of this little bird here. And so what I'm going to do, because I already have all of the work done, is I'm going to come over to our bird adjust, and I'm going to click here on the actual mask. If I right click, I can click on copy. And then if I go over to effects, I'm going to add in a color enhancer here. And this just saves me having to use the masking tools inside of the effects section. And so I'll come over here to color enhancer. And once I have that added, I'm going to left click on the mask icon and then right click. And this is going to give me my menu. And if I come down here, I can just go ahead and paste that mask. And so now I'm only applying this adjustment to the two birds. If I press the letter O, you can see that that's where my adjustment is going. And so if I come over here to the yellows and I increase the saturation, look at that. I'm like making that bird super yellow. Don't want to do that. All right. But I do want it to be a little bit more yellow. And then we'll come into orange and maybe even saturate some oranges. So we're really starting to pull the colors out of the bird. Now, this is also impacting the larger bird here. So what I want to do is come up to masking, hit the plus icon. I'm going to click on brush, and I'm going to subtract from this mask. And I'm just going to go ahead and erase this bird here, because I don't need this adjustment going over this bird. All right. If I press the letter O, looks like I still got a little bit there. And now this bird is not receiving any of this color enhancer adjustment, just the little bird. And so if I go Command and 0 to zoom out, if I turn off the color enhancer and then turn it back on, you can see that bird is the only one getting the adjustment. Now, that's probably way too much saturation that's going on here. So let's go ahead and pull down opacity on this and just fade it in until the bird starts to look appropriate. I think right around here looks the best. So again, turning it off and turning it on just gives the bird a little bit more color and helps the bird stand out. Now, what I also want to do is apply a little bit of dynamic contrast to these birds. So we'll click on Add Filter. And of course, we're going to add in a dynamic contrast. And I am going to right click, or first left click on the thumbnail for the mask. Then I'm going to right click and I'm going to paste in that exact same mask for the birds, because I already have that copied. Now, typically what I do here is I click on Surreal and I'll just pull down on the opacity and fade that in. But honestly, I feel like the default of natural looks the best for this particular image, and I don't want to overdo it, because when you print, you typically don't need as much contrast as you would think. As long as the printer has enough information to separate the most defined lines, you're going to get a pretty good print. All right. Just test it out, see what works for you. Now, I have my dynamic contrast. I have the color. I need to do maybe one or two last things to really make this photo ready for printing. And that is getting rid of some distractions first. So we're going to come over to our left tool well. And right now I have the AI Perfect Eraser or Generative Eraser tool that's actually selected. So you could definitely use that. But what I'm going to use is actually the healing brush. All right. And that's going to be the two little circles. Now, you want to make sure that it's set to heal because you could be on any of these other options, but I want to be on heal. And I'm going to get rid of this distraction here. I won't tell you what it is, but just know it's something that organically comes from these animals. All right. And so now that's gone. And then, of course, I want to get rid of this little area over here because I don't think I need to crop this image. And so I'm just going to get rid of this as best I can, and then it should sample somewhere. Now I need to come over here and we'll just go ahead and close it out for a second. Sometimes you don't always get the little indicator. And so you got to close out the healing brush and then open it again. And now I get my little indicators of showing me where things are being sampled from. The green is where it's sampling. Of course, I'm trying to get rid of grass. So why would I add grass back in? Now, I'm okay with these like little sticks and things. And so I'm just going to actually line this up with this crack and let that go right there. And I like what it's doing. Now, I have a little bit of green right here in the middle. And so I'm just going to paint over that just like so. And I need to line that up. But again, I lost my little indicators. So I'll hit the blue check mark to close that out, come back in, and there it is. And I'm just going to pull this over to here and maybe line it up with this. Yeah, like that. And I think that that looks good. I got rid of the distractions that I wanted to get rid of in this particular image. And, you know, you could argue maybe getting rid of this distraction right here. But now I'm just getting like more nitpicky because I could sit here all day and find tons of things that I may want to get rid of. And so now the image is prepared for print. So here's what we came into On1 Photo Raw with. It's a relatively flat image and, you know, could you print this? Sure. Would it come out looking the way that you want? Probably not. After a little bit of work inside of On1, we were able to get to an image that looks like this. And yes, I could do a whole lot more work to this particular image and get it so much further. But the important thing is this didn't take that much time, and I could print this image and put it into an album or put it into a photo book, and it comes out just fine. Now, in the event, if I hold down the J key, in the event that, you know, your clipping just isn't working out well, what you can do, and this is like a last ditch effort, by the way, you can come over to add filter. And if you're still clipping, you can add a curves filter. And then wherever you're clipping, if it's in the shadows or in the, or if you're clipping in the blacks or the whites, I should say, you can come to this little node and you can pull down like so on the whites. And then that's going to preserve the brightest pixels and essentially give the file some information to tell the printer that don't just print all white here or don't print anything, print something. All right. And then you can do the same thing with the blacks, but for this image, we were able to recover all of that dynamic range inside of the develop module, which is why it's very important to start editing your images in the develop module and not just jumping straight into the effects module, as I've witnessed some people doing. If you found value, go ahead and smash the like button. If you got questions, leave them down below. If you want to pick up On1 Photo Raw, consider using the affiliate link, Freewell Photos 20. That's going to save you some money at checkout. Now, I do make a commission from everyone who uses that coupon code and the link that's down in the description box, but that's at no extra charge to you. It's a great way of supporting the channel, so it's like a win-win. Now, if you want to learn how to use On1 Photo Raw a little bit faster, consider signing up for a training call with me. You can find a link for that down in the description box below, along with signing up for the Freewell Photos Academy. So with all of that said, until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.